interview is critical because so much of this verdict and the reaction around it has been focused squarely on the prosecution team. There are a lot of questions over whether they presented the best possible case. I know it's easy to be, Monday morning quarterback. Want to bring in our legal dream team, criminal defense attorneys Darren Kavanoki, Tanya Miller, and Ariva Martin. Great to talk to you on this Monday after the verdict, a big day. Darren, I'll start with you and the prosecution. When we look back, do you think that they just didn't kind of nail down a theory on exactly what happened? There were too many questions. And Mark O'Mara said to the jury, it's not your job to connect the dots of what happened that night.
Well, right. And we just saw in that interview with Vinnie Politan that, that what prosecutors were doing, for example, is painting George Zimmerman as a liar. And if the issue in the case was, is George Zimmerman a liar, I think they've got proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But that's not the end of the discussion. And it's not enough to say that George Zimmerman isn't trustworthy. You've got to put forward evidence that those jurors can hang their hat on so that they can lawfully return a conviction. That's where the breakdown was. Fundamentally, there were a lot of presentation errors, in my view, and it all originated with shoddy investigation.
With the investigation. Tanya, what do you think? Would there have been a different outcome, in your opinion, if they maybe went after a manslaughter charge? Do you think they overcharged here with second-degree murder?
You know, I really don't think they overcharged. I mean, as a former prosecutor, you really expect to see a prosecutor go for the highest charge that they think they can prove. And so many people saw this trial unfold. And notwithstanding this jury's verdict, many people believed after seeing it, sort of the court of public opinion, that murder was proved. So I don't think that they overcharged in the case. I thought the murder charge was appropriate. And let's not forget, the jurors had the lesser included charge on manslaughter. They considered manslaughter, and they also rejected it. So if they believed George Zimmerman's version of self-defense, which it looks like they did, it really wouldn't have mattered whether it was murder or manslaughter.
Well, it just seems like in the way that it was presented, though, and again, I'm thinking about the closing arguments when the parties need to sum it all up for those jurors.
Right.
There was no clear signposting. There was no clear, listen, ladies and gentlemen, this is why it's murder.
A lot of would have or could have,
right.
or
and if
maybe
you don't
this
find
happened.
murder, here's why it would be manslaughter. They failed in that.
Okay. Ariva, what do you think about the prosecution in terms of what a lot of people are saying may have been a big mistake in showing the video of George Zimmerman and him taking us through what he claims happened that night, and that eliminated him having to testify?
Yeah, Susan, I definitely agree with Darren that I think the prosecution made a lot of mistakes, and that's one of them, because once we had so many versions of George Zimmerman's story for that evening, we definitely, relieved all the pressure off the defense team to have George Zimmerman testify. I also don't think that interview, at least the parts you just showed us, is helping the prosecution's team. They just acknowledged that there wasn't enough time. They acknowledged that there were inconsistent witnesses, yet they asked the jurors to find George Zimmerman guilty of murder or the lesser degree manslaughter, and as I think they acknowledged themselves, they never really gave the jurors anything, a cohesive, coherent story. And, I've been reporting on this for the last couple of weeks during this trial, and many of us were asking, we wanted the prosecution to tell us what is a theory that these jurors can hang their hats on, because we thought George Zimmerman was guilty and we wanted a guilty verdict, but we never saw that story. Yet we knew George Zimmerman's story very well. We knew he was saying he did follow Trayvon for a certain period of time, but yet he got back in the car, and that when he got out of the car the second time, Trayvon confronted him, and Trayvon was the initial aggressor. And we never saw the prosecution successfully undermine or in any way impeach that story.
Yeah, you bring up some great points. We have a lot to talk about. We know you're going to stick around for the whole hour. But the not guilty verdict, it's not the end of George Zimmerman's legal drama. We'll talk about this next. Today, a member of the president's cabinet is speaking out. What clues did we get about a future legal case? Is there one? And in a trial that has been so racially diverse, it was impossible, rather, not to notice the African-American woman serving on George Zimmerman's defense team learn the one thing she had to know before agreeing to work on the case. You'll meet her.
after the verdict was read and everything, they gave him his gun back. Say, look, here's your gun back. Go kill some more people, okay? You didn't do a better job this time.
I was really hoping that we could deliver justice for Trayvon Martin since his life was so tragically taken away, and I'm here because that justice wasn't served by the courts, but it can be served by the people in the streets.
As you know, George Zimmerman found not guilty in the shooting death of Trayvon Martin, but his legal troubles could be far from over. Zimmerman was acquitted, but he could still be held responsible for Trayvon's death. He now faces the possibility of a civil lawsuit from Trayvon's parents for wrongful death. And the NAACP is pushing Attorney General Eric Holder to pursue a civil rights lawsuit against Zimmerman, saying race was a factor. The Attorney General answering back today. Here he is.
I want to assure you that the department will continue to act in a manner that is consistent with the facts and the law. We are committed to standing with the people of Sanford, with the individuals and families affected by this incident, and with our state and local partners in order to alleviate tensions, to address community concerns, and to promote healing.
Back now to our legal dream team. I want to start with Ariva in Los Angeles. Do you think there'll be a civil lawsuit in the aftermath of this?
You know, Susan, there's been a lot of pressure. We saw the Attorney General make a statement. We know that Ben Jealous, the president of the NAACP, is really pushing, and activists and advocates all over this country want to see justice in light of this verdict. But one thing that concerns me is that there are reports that there's an FBI report that exonerates George Zimmerman. The kind of lawsuit we're talking about from the Department of Justice would be a hate crime under a federal criminal statute, which says essentially that it's a crime to kill someone or to cause bodily harm to someone simply because of their race. So in this case, you know, the claim would be that George Zimmerman shot Trayvon Martin because he's African American. Now, the report is that the FBI has done a full investigation, has talked to witnesses, has reviewed the same evidence that was put forth in the state criminal trial, and they found that George Zimmerman may be a wannabe cop, may have a superhero complex, but they didn't find that George Zimmerman acted out of racial animus or racial bias. So if there is a lawsuit by the Department of Justice, if there is a claim, I hope that there's credible evidence and we don't see what we just saw in this state trial.
Darren, we talked about that during the break. You were touching on that as well.
Yeah, well, and just to amplify what Ariva was saying, and all of that is right on, this was even an issue that was brought up during the case, and the judge in the criminal case said that that it wasn't a racial issue, that it could only be criminal profiling that was argued, not racial profiling. And this investigation that Ariva was referring to, this was done some time ago. I can't imagine that the case got any better for the government now that we've gone through the state court system. And then, of course, there's still the issue of a wrongful death plaintiff's personal injury lawsuit. And what's interesting here, there's going to be some legal wrangling. Florida's got some interesting statutes in this regard.
Tanya, do you think that they have the means for a civil lawsuit which allows one party to seek monetary damages, we're talking about money, against another for causing physical or emotional harm? It seems that that's what happened to Trayvon.
Well, I definitely think that the facts would support that. I mean, I always believed that the facts supported the second-degree murder charge. I certainly believe that there is sufficient evidence to show. Remember, the standard's a lot lower in a civil case. It's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a preponderance of the evidence. So I think you can definitely see a civil case.
Yeah, we think back to O.J. Simpson,
Yeah, but
found
Florida's
not
got some
guilty.
unique laws there. So there are some hurdles that the plaintiff would have to get over that are unique to Florida.
All right, guys, thanks so much. We're still talking. One member of George Zimmerman's team, he stuck out. He did also remember the battle between him and the judge, but also an African-American woman volunteered to help him for free. We're going to hear from some of you. What do you think about the verdict in this trial as well?
They went through the grieving process. They cried. They prayed. They went to church Sunday morning, and when Sabrina Fulton came home from church, she said, "Attorney Crump, this verdict will not define Trayvon. We will define Trayvon." And I was so inspired by her. They've been so dignified and graceful throughout this, you know, just terrible situation that has been laid upon their doorstep.
You certainly have to feel for Trayvon's parents after the verdict. The George Zimmerman trial highlights an issue that doesn't often get a lot of attention. What role does race play in our legal system? Does this case highlight a need for change? Back to our legal experts, criminal defense attorneys Sarah Kavanoki, Tanya Miller, and Ariva Martin in Los Angeles. So, Tanya, I'll start with you. Is there a racial bias in our legal system?
Well, I think there's racial bias in our society. Our system is made up of human beings. It's made up of people. It's only as unbiased as the people who are responsible for administering it. So I think this case points out the need, the dire need to have diversity in our legal system, diversity in prosecutors' offices, in law enforcement, in jury. So, you know, I've always encouraged people, when you get that jury summons, serve for jury duty. It's just important that we all participate in this system. That's how you eliminate racial bias.
Such a good point. And Ariva, I thought it was so powerful. Excuse me, when John Guy said if the situation was reversed and Trayvon Martin was driving around in a car, followed and shot George Zimmerman, what would your verdict be? And if they were different races. So I thought that was powerful in his closing argument.
It was absolutely powerful, Susan, and I want to go a little further than Tanya. I want to say the criminal justice system is replete with inequities, from conviction to charging to sentencing. African Americans, and particularly African American males, are disproportionately treated unfairly in the criminal justice system. This case just highlights that. This case brought that front and center into the homes of Americans, and it showed whether you're a defendant or a victim. If you're an African American male in the criminal justice system, you are not going to be treated the same way that a white teenager would be treated. And absolutely, if this case were different, if George Zimmerman was not the non-African American, if Trayvon Martin had shot George Zimmerman, I can't believe but to say that there would be a different outcome in this trial and we would not be having this discussion. But I'm glad we're having it because maybe something will start to change as a result of it.
Darren, I see you want to talk about this in response.
You know, it's so interesting. I'm glad we're talking about it, too. I'm a huge fan of having fierce and authentic conversations. I don't mind being challenged. Really? Hard to believe. But I see there as being plenty of problems in the justice system. First of all, not a perfect system, the best system in the world, but far from perfect. And to me, in my experience, it's more about financial inequality and other inequalities. I think there are things that are broken. Fundamentally, one of the problems I perceive is that we lock people up for taking particular actions, but we don't do, which is dealing with the symptoms, but we don't do anything to solve the underlying problem.
But what about African American men who are in our jail system, in the prisons, for nonviolent crimes? There's been arguments about that happens way too often. George Zimmerman, claiming self-defense, shoots a 17-year-old boy and he walks.
I absolutely got it. And I think the way John Guy articulated it during closing argument was powerful. I just don't know that it was true. I really hope it wasn't. I would like to think...
the statistics are there.
Well, I'm not sure which statistics we're talking about. And listen, there's plenty that's broken about it. I'm not saying that it's perfect. And I agree that the system is only as good as the people that are participating in it. And there's lots of conversations to have.
And Tanya, what about the defense saying that there were some burglaries in the area and that's why George Zimmerman wanted to keep an eye on Trayvon? Is that profiling?
It is, but you know, we do that in our everyday lives to some extent. I think what the defense was doing in this case was a little more insidious than that. I think when they called the witness, the neighbor, the woman who'd had the home invasion, put her on and had her described as very horrific incident, they were really trying to perpetuate this perception that George Zimmerman had about young black males and trying to let these jurors know, listen, it was okay, here's why he had it, and it was playing on that fear that many people have about African American males, particularly young males, that they are thugs, that they are criminal. And so I think they did. I think they were doing that intentionally. I don't think it was an accident.
But sometimes
and I think the jurors got that impression.
Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. It doesn't have to mean something else.
You lost me on that one.
Darren, but not in this case.
It's a Sigmund Freud thing. I'm sorry.
Not in this case, Darren.
No, I think the reason they put her on is because George Zimmerman's mindset towards those people that were, the importance of the rule, but not those people being black people.
Ariva, at the end of the day, was this really about evidence, though, and lack thereof? And when the defense gave their closing argument, and Mark O'Mara had that chart of saying, even if you kind of maybe don't believe it was self-defense, still you have to rule not guilty. So in terms of the law...
I think, Susan, these jurors worked with what they had to work with, and I don't think we can find fault in what they did. I think this disaster happened for 3 reasons. We have the Florida law that basically says shoot first and ask questions later. And if you're an African-American male, that is a problem. And when this Stand Your Ground law was enacted in Florida, legislators said this is creating a license to profile African-American males. So they knew this was going to be a problem. We had the inconsistencies and the poor presentation by the defense, and we have the systemic problems in the criminal justice system. All those things combined, disaster for this case.
Well, the real disaster is that there are people who feel the system lacks integrity. And that's why, thank God, this trial was televised. But that's what's so heartbreaking to me.
I am glad it was televised. It's a discussion that we're going to have for many days and years to come because of this. Ariva, Tanya, Darren, thank you.
Thanks,
Always
Susan.
great to talk to you.